There was a period in UFC history when Conor McGregor felt less like a fighter and more like a phenomenon. Every time he walked into the Octagon, there was a strange sense that the ending had already been written. Fans felt it. Commentators felt it. Even his opponents seemed to feel it. He wasn't simply winning fights. He was predicting them, announcing them to the world, and then making them happen in front of millions of people. That level of confidence alone would have made him fascinating. But what truly made him terrifying was that his predictions kept coming true. While other fighters hoped their game plans would work, McGregor carried himself like a man who had already seen the future. And for several years, it genuinely looked like he had. Most people remember the knockouts. They remember the left hand, the celebrations, the press conferences, and the viral moments that turned him into a global superstar. But if you look deeper beyond the highlight reels, you'll discover something far more impressive. Prime Conor McGregor wasn't just powerful. He was incredibly intelligent inside the cage. Every movement served a purpose. Every feint was a question designed to force an answer. Every step manipulated distance. Every exchange gathered information. He wasn't fighting randomly. He was building a puzzle in real time. And by the time his opponents realized what was happening, they were already trapped inside it. What separated McGregor from many knockout artists was that he rarely relied on brute force alone. Plenty of fighters hit hard. Plenty of fighters possess explosive power. But very few understand how to consistently create the perfect conditions for that power to succeed. McGregor understood that the knockout punch is often thrown minutes before it actually lands. The setup begins long before the finish. He would spend entire rounds collecting reactions, identifying habits, exposing weaknesses, and subtly conditioning opponents to expect one thing before giving them something completely different. To casual viewers, the finish looked sudden. To McGregor, it was simply the conclusion of a process that had been unfolding since the opening seconds. Perhaps the most frightening aspect of his prime was how calm he looked while doing it. There was no panic, no hesitation, no wasted motion. He moved through fights with a level of confidence that bordered on arrogance, yet somehow he kept backing it up. Opponents often entered the cage determined to silence him, but that emotional energy frequently worked against them. The more aggressive they became, the more opportunities they gave him. The angrier they got, the more predictable they became. McGregor thrived in chaos because he understood it better than the people creating it. He wanted reactions. He wanted mistakes. He wanted opponents to abandon discipline. And when they did, the consequences were usually immediate. For a brief stretch of time, it felt like nobody had an answer. Featherweights couldn't stop him. Lightweights couldn't stop him. Veterans couldn't stop him. Champions couldn't stop him. Every fight seemed to follow a similar script. The opponent would start confidently, believing they had discovered a weakness. Then McGregor will begin reading patterns. The openings would appear. The timing would sharpen. The pressure would build. And eventually the moment would come. One clean shot. One devastating counter. One perfectly timed sequence. Suddenly another contender was staring at the lights while McGregor celebrated in the center of cage. What makes the story even more fascinating is that his success wasn't built on a single skill. People often reduce his greatness to the famous left hand, but that explanation barely scratches the surface. The left hand was a weapon, but the real genius was everything that allowed him to use it. His footwork, his timing, his understanding of distance, his ability to control the pace of a fight, his psychological warfare, his talent for making elite athletes doubt themselves. All of those elements worked together to create a fighter who felt almost impossible to solve during his peak years. And that's why, years later, fans still debate just how good prime Conor McGregor really was. Because when you go back and study those performances carefully, you begin to realize that the knockouts were only the visible part of the story. Underneath them was a fighter operating at an incredibly high level of strategic awareness. A fighter who could process information at extraordinary speed. A fighter who seemed to know exactly what his opponents wanted to do before they did it themselves. Today, we're going to break down what made that version of Conor McGregor so dangerous and why. For a few unforgettable years, he completely changed the landscape of mixed martial arts. When McGregor made his UFC debut against Marcus Brimage, many fans were seeing him for the first time. At that point, he was far from the superstar he would eventually become. But even in those opening moments, there were clues that something special was happening. His stance immediately stood out. It was wide, relaxed, and unconventional. His hand sat lower than most coaches would recommend. He moved constantly, shifting directions and changing angles, rather than appearing tense or cautious. He looked completely comfortable. While many debuting fighters spend the early moments trying to settle their nerves, McGregor seemed to be gathering information from the very beginning. Almost immediately, he identified a tendency in Brimmage's offense. Every time Brimage attempted to close distance, he lowered his level aggressively. Many fighters would have needed several minutes to recognize that pattern. McGregor noticed it almost instantly. More importantly, he began building traps around it. He started threatening uppercuts. Sometimes he threw them. Sometimes he simply hinted at them. The purpose wasn't necessarily to land the punch. The purpose was to influence Brimmage's reactions. Each feint became a test. Each movement gathered more information. Slowly but surely, McGregor began shaping the fight according to his own vision. Then the breakthrough came. Brimage reacted exactly how McGregor anticipated. The Irishman capitalized immediately, landing clean counters and forcing his opponent into increasingly uncomfortable positions. What stood out wasn't just the accuracy of the punches. It was the speed with which McGregor adjusted. He wasn't thinking one step ahead. He seemed to be thinking several steps ahead. The knockout sequence felt less like a sudden explosion and more like the inevitable result of a trap that had already been set. It was a perfect introduction to the themes that would define his career. Against Diego Brandao, those same qualities became even more apparent. Brandao was dangerous, aggressive, and capable of ending a fight with a single strike. Yet McGregor approached the challenge with remarkable composure. He pressured intelligently, cutting off movement and forcing Brandao to make decisions under stress. Every time Brandao tried to escape in one direction, McGregor seemed prepared. Every time he attempted to create space, another obstacle appeared. Rather than chasing recklessly, McGregor controlled the geography of the fight, gradually steering his opponent toward the positions he wanted. The eventual knockout looked spectacular, but the real story was everything that happened beforehand. McGregor spent the fight manipulating movement and limiting options. By the time the finishing punch landed, Brandao had already been guided through a series of unfavorable decisions. That's one of the reasons so many of McGregor's victories appeared effortless. The audience often focused on the final punch, but the finish was usually the result of several smaller battles that had already been won. Then came Dustin Poirier, a fighter who would later become one of the most respected competitors in the history of the lightweight division. At the time, many believed Poirier possessed the tools necessary to challenge McGregor. He was tough, skilled, and experienced. Yet when the fight unfolded, McGregor delivered one of the most memorable performances of his early UFC run. What made the finish so impressive wasn't simply the power involved. It was a deception. Everyone expected the left hand. Poirier expected the left hand. The entire MMA world expected the left hand. Yet somehow McGregor continued finding ways to land it. He used his jab to close distance. He changed angles. He forced Poirier's attention toward one threat before attacking from another direction. The finishing sequence perfectly illustrated a recurring theme throughout his career. His greatest weapon wasn't necessarily his power. It was his ability to make elite fighters react to the wrong thing at the wrong time. The fight against Dennis Siver showcased another important aspect of his game. Unlike some of his quicker finishes, this wasn't about an immediate knockout. It was about sustained control. From the opening moments, McGregor dictated range. He attacked from long distance with kicks and straight punches. He moved constantly and refused to allow Siver comfortable opportunities to engage. Every attempt to close distance came with consequences. Every mistake was punished. Slowly but steadily, the pressure accumulated. What made McGregor so difficult to deal with was that he understood range better than most fighters of his era. He knew exactly where he could hit opponents while remaining just outside their reach. To spectators, it often looked like extraordinary reflexes. In reality, much of the work was done before the punches were ever thrown. His footwork consistently placed him in advantageous positions. He wasn't merely reacting to danger. He was preventing danger from developing in the first place. Then came Chad Mendes, and for the first time, many fans saw McGregor face genuine adversity. Mendes possessed elite wrestling, tremendous athleticism, and a style specifically designed to test the weaknesses many believed McGregor had. The fight quickly turned into a grueling battle. There were difficult moments. There were takedowns. There were exchanges where momentum shifted back and forth. For perhaps the first time in his UFC career, McGregor looked vulnerable. Yet what stood out was his ability to adapt. Even while dealing with adversity, he continued gathering information. He attacked the body. He forced Mendes to work. He made every exchange physically taxing. As the fight progressed, fatigue began affecting both men. But McGregor excelled at recognizing those moments. The instant he sensed vulnerability, he accelerated. Combinations became sharper. Counters became more dangerous. Pressure increased. Suddenly, the fight shifted dramatically, ending with another signature finish. Then came the fight that elevated him from superstar to legend, Jose Aldo. At the time, Aldo wasn't simply a champion. He was widely considered one of the greatest fighters in UFC history. For years, he had dominated the featherweight division with incredible consistency. Many believed nobody could dethrone him. Yet the build-up to the fight became one of the most psychologically intense rivalries the sport had ever seen. For months, McGregor attacked relentlessly through interviews, press conferences, and media appearances. Some fans dismissed it as promotion. Others believed it was strategic warfare. When fight night finally arrived, the answer became clear. Aldo entered the cage carrying visible emotion. McGregor entered carrying confidence. Seconds later, one of the most iconic knockouts in combat sports history unfolded. The finish lasted only moments, but it represented years of preparation, analysis, and psychological pressure culminating in a single perfectly timed counter. If the Aldo fight established McGregor as a legend, the Eddie Alvarez fight may have represented the technical peak of his career. Everything seemed to click. His timing was flawless. His movement was sharp. His combinations flowed effortlessly. Alvarez, a world-class champion with tremendous experience, struggled to solve the puzzle in front of him. McGregor repeatedly forced reactions and punished them with astonishing precision. One particular sequence remains among the cleanest combinations ever seen in a championship fight. Punches flowed together so naturally that it almost looked choreographed. Yet, nothing about it was accidental. Every strike positioned him for the next one. Every movement created a new opening. By the end of the night, McGregor stood as the first simultaneous two-division champion in UFC history, a moment that cemented his place among the sport's most influential figures. Years later, after setbacks and long periods away from competition, he returned against Donald Cerrone. Although the fight lasted only seconds, it provided one final reminder of the qualities that made him special. He immediately identified opportunities. He attacked decisively. He refused to waste time. A brief exchange turned into a devastating finish. Even though it would become his final UFC knockout victory, it still reflected many of the principles that had defined his rise. Looking back across all these performances, certain patterns become impossible to ignore. The first is his mastery of timing. McGregor possessed an extraordinary ability to recognize exactly when an opponent was vulnerable. He understood that fractions of a second can determine the outcome of a fight. While many fighters focus primarily on speed, McGregor focused on timing. And in combat sports, timing often beats speed. The second pattern is his counter-striking. Prime McGregor loved making opponents attack first. He wanted them to believe they had discovered an opening. He wanted them to commit. Then, at the precise moment they overextended, he responded with devastating accuracy. His ability to punish mistakes became one of the defining characteristics of his career. The third pattern is movement. Before he became more boxing-oriented later in his career, McGregor's footwork was incredibly fluid. He constantly changed rhythms, directions, and angles. Opponents struggled to establish consistent timing because he rarely moved predictably. One moment he appeared relaxed and patient. The next, he exploded forward with remarkable speed. That unpredictability created hesitation, and hesitation against an elite striker can be fatal. Then there was the psychological component. Whether people loved him or hated him, nobody can deny his impact outside the cage. McGregor understood that fights begin long before the opening bell. He recognized the importance of confidence, belief, and mental pressure. He forced opponents to think about him constantly. In many cases, the psychological battle had already started weeks or months before fight night arrived. Of course, no fighter is without weaknesses. As brilliant as McGregor was during his prime, certain limitations eventually became more apparent. His explosive style demanded enormous amounts of energy. He threw punches with bad intentions. He relied on bursts of speed and power. That approach often made him devastating early, but it could become difficult to sustain over longer fights. Pressure fighters also presented unique challenges. Counter-strikers generally perform best when opponents give them opportunities. Fighters who advance relentlessly, absorb pressure, and force prolonged exchanges often created difficult situations for McGregor. They reduced his ability to control distance and disrupted the rhythm he preferred. The grappling aspect of mixed martial arts also created challenges. While McGregor developed respectable defensive wrestling and showed impressive takedown defense at times, elite grapplers could still create problems when they successfully forced fights into prolonged ground exchanges. Like every fighter in MMA history, he had strengths and weaknesses, and eventually opponents learned how to target both. But none of that changes what happened during his peak years. For a remarkable period of time, Conor McGregor transformed the sport. He changed how fighters promoted themselves. He changed how fans consumed MMA. He changed what athletes believed was possible. More importantly, he delivered performances that continue to captivate audiences years later. At his best, he wasn't simply a knockout artist. He was a strategist disguised as a showman, a technician disguised as a superstar, a fighter capable of combining timing, precision, movement, confidence, and psychological warfare into a style that felt completely unique. That's why his prime remains one of the most discussed eras in UFC history. And that's why, even today, fans still go back and watch those fights, searching for new details they may have missed the first time. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want more deep dives into legendary fighters, iconic rivalries, and the hidden details behind some of the greatest careers in combat sport history, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell me in the comments which fighter you want analyzed next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.